The city-state of Singapore should not exist in its current form. No oil or gold or vast fields of wheat. Half the size of Los Angeles, about 6 million people packed onto an island smaller than New York City. In 1965, when it was forced into independence, the average Singaporean earned around $500 a year. Less than Jamaica, less than Ghana, poorer than most of Africa. Today, Singapore's income per person is over $80,000, higher than the United States, higher than Switzerland, one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. On paper, this is impossible. Countries get rich from something. Oil in the Middle East, minerals in Australia, farmland in America, factories in China. Singapore had none of that, just a humid, swampy island at the tip of Malaysia that nobody really wanted. But one man saw something almost no one else did. And what he built was not just a country, it was a corporation with a flag, a balance sheet with a national anthem. Once you understand the strategy, Singapore stops looking like an economic miracle and starts looking like the most ruthlessly executed business plan of the modern era. August 9th, 1965. Singapore is not celebrating independence. It is being expelled. Malaysia doesn't want it anymore. Too fragile, too tense, too complicated. On national television, Singapore's Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, announces the separation. He doesn't look triumphant. He breaks down and cries. Not as a performance, but because he understands what the world is thinking. Singapore cannot survive. Look at what he inherits. No natural resources, no army, no fresh water of its own. It literally has to import water from Malaysia. Almost no industry beyond a struggling port. Deep ethnic tension between Chinese, Malay, and Indian communities. British troops are leaving, taking jobs, spending, and security with them. The neighbors? Not friendly. Indonesia, Malaysia, others, none of them would lose sleep if this new country quietly failed. Indonesia has oil. Malaysia has palm oil and rubber. Thailand has tourism and agriculture. Singapore has humidity, mosquitoes, and a port that's losing relevance. The outside verdict is brutal. The World Bank is skeptical. Foreign experts are dismissive. Many predict collapse within 5 years. On paper, the model doesn't work. Lee Kuan Yew disagrees. Not because he's naive, not because he's romantic, because he sees a pattern no one else is looking for. He looks not at what Singapore has, but at what it doesn't have, and realizes that absence can be an advantage. Singapore sits at a crossroads that has shaped trade for centuries. It's perched at the narrow choke point between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Every ship traveling between Europe, the Middle East, India, and East Asia passes through one bottleneck, the Strait of Malacca, right past Singapore. It is one of the most strategic maritime locations on Earth, not because of what lies under the ground, but because of what sails past on the water. But geography alone is not destiny. Ports line this route. Malaysia can build ports, Indonesia can build ports, Thailand can build ports. They all have more land, more resources, bigger domestic markets. Why should any ship choose Singapore? Lee Kuan Yew identifies the one lever Singapore can fully control: efficiency. If Singapore becomes the most efficient, most reliable, most predictable, most business-friendly hub in Asia, ships will choose it even when they don't technically have to. But that requires something radical. He cannot run Singapore like a traditional country. He has to run it like a company. Treat the nation as if it were a corporation. Citizens as human capital. Infrastructure as capital expenditure. Government as management. GDP as the income statement. Not democracy first. Not ideology first. Not even fairness first. Survival first. Efficiency first. Results first. This isn't nation building in the romantic sense. It's a management consulting case study played out at national scale. Cold, focused, brutally pragmatic. And it is about to work better than almost anyone thought possible. Lee moves quickly. There is no luxury of time. If this experiment fails, there is no second chance. Phase 1. Build the hardware. The port is modernized. Cranes, container terminals, 24-hour operations. Delays are unacceptable. Corruption is treated not as a moral flaw, but as a cost and a bottleneck. If a bribe slows a shipment by even a day, that's lost revenue. So corruption must go. They begin building what will become Changi Airport, engineered from day one not to be good enough, but to be the best in Asia. They build public housing for the majority of the population, not to fulfill a utopian dream, but because unstable housing creates unstable workers, and unstable workers are bad for productivity. Every decision passes through one filter: Does this make Singapore a more attractive place to do business? Phase 2. Attract capital. If you don't have oil, you can't sell barrels, but you can sell stability. Singapore decides to become the safest, cleanest, most efficient home for everyone else's money. Corporate taxes are kept low. Capital gains are not taxed. Foreign companies are not tolerated, they are actively courted. Property rights are enforced. Contracts mean what they say. And above all, corruption is attacked like a disease. Most low-tax countries are also chaotic and corrupt. Singapore offers something rare: low taxes and high reliability. If you are a multinational corporation choosing a base for Asian operations, do you choose the place with bribes, chaos, and endless bureaucracy? Or the place where your containers move on time, your contracts are upheld, and your people feel safe? Headquarters arrive, banks arrive, manufacturers arrive, oil trading desks arrive. Singapore doesn't need its own resources, it takes a cut of everyone else's. Phase 3. Become a financial hub. Ports bring in ships, finance brings in power. Singapore sets itself up as the Swiss Bank of Asia. Stable currency, predictable regulations, banking secrecy, especially in the earlier years, strong courts using English common law. Wealth from Indonesia, Malaysia, China, India starts flowing into Singaporean accounts. The city-state becomes a safe deposit box for an entire region's fortunes. Phase 4. Upgrade the people. Resources can be depleted, people can be developed. Singapore makes English an official language, not as an identity shift, as a business decision. It's the language of contracts, of aviation, of global finance. Schools are optimized for math, science, engineering, and finance. Top students are sent abroad on government scholarships, with contracts requiring them to return. Universities are upgraded. Foreign experts are brought in. Technical training is relentless. The goal is not vague education. The goal is a workforce more skilled, more disciplined, more reliable than any competitor in the region. This isn't sentimental nation building. This is product development. The product is Singapore itself. Here is the part that makes many people uncomfortable. Singapore's success is not entirely despite its political system. In many ways, it is because of it. Lee Kuan Yew governs like a CEO with super voting shares. One party, the People's Action Party, dominates for decades. Opposition figures are sued, discredited, financially crushed. Media is tightly regulated. Public assembly is controlled. Criticism has boundaries. This is not a Western-style liberal democracy. It is a technocratic, authoritarian system with a narrow mission: development. And that system allows something rare in politics: long-term planning with almost no gridlock. When the government decides a new airport is needed, it gets built. When it decides the port must be expanded, it is expanded. When it decides ethnic housing quotas are necessary to prevent ghettos, the policy is implemented. Chewing gum is banned, not because of moral panic, but because cleaning it off trains and sidewalks costs money. Drug trafficking carries the death penalty. Vandalism can lead to caning. Littering comes with real fines. The message is blunt. This society runs on rules. Everyone follows them. While Western democracies hold debates, inquiries, and parliamentary fights over high-speed rail and airports, Singapore plans, funds, and executes within a single political cycle. The uncomfortable truth is this: authoritarian efficiency can work if the people in charge are competent and more focused on national wealth than personal enrichment. Lee Kuan Yew was not building a palace. He was building Singapore, Inc. From 1965 to 2000, Singapore's economy grew around 8% per year on average. For more than 3 decades. That is not an accident. That is execution. Fast forward. By the 2000s, ports and basic manufacturing are no longer a unique advantage. China has megaports. Malaysia has upgraded. Vietnam is rising. Competition is everywhere. So Singapore pivots. Again. It reinvents itself as a high-tech, high-finance, high-innovation hub. Biotech labs, fintech startups, cloud data centers, regional headquarters for global tech companies. Salaries are high, taxes are still low, visas are streamlined for highly skilled workers. The skyline changes, Marina Bay Sands, gardens by the bay. These are not just pretty landmarks, they are advertisements. Billboards made of steel and light saying, "We are not a cheap port, we are a premium hub. We plan a century ahead." Behind the scenes, 2 giants grow quietly, Temasek Holdings and GIC, Singapore's sovereign wealth funds. Together, they manage hundreds of billions of dollars, over $1 trillion combined. They don't wait for capital to show up. They send Singapore's capital out. buying stakes in banks, in tech companies, in real estate, in infrastructure projects around the world. Returns from those investments flow back into the system, funding future development. Even Singapore's original weaknesses are turned into strengths. Water, once a vulnerability, becomes a case study. Desalination plants, recycling systems so advanced that Singapore can, in theory, be water self-sufficient. A former liability transformed into a technology export. Meanwhile, Malaysia, the country that once kicked Singapore out, has income per person around $12,000. Indonesia, far larger, around $5,000. Singapore, over $80,000. Same region, same decades, different strategy, different outcome. This is what 60 years of compounded decisions looks like. So what does Singapore really teach us about building wealth? First, resources do not decide outcomes. Strategy does. Singapore started with almost nothing except geography and a willingness to optimize everything. Most countries with nothing stay poor. Singapore chose to treat its constraints as design features. Second, efficiency is a weapon. In a region where governments are slow, corrupt, and unpredictable, being fast, clean, and reliable is a superpower. Singapore didn't try to have more, it tried to work better. Third, long-term thinking beats election cycle thinking. Lee Kuan Yew planned in decades. Infrastructure built in the 1970s was meant for industries that wouldn't peak until the 2000s. Most politicians plan from headline to headline. Singapore planned from generation to generation. Fourth, trade-offs are real. Singapore traded some political freedom for order, growth, and safety. You can argue about whether the trade is worth it, but you cannot pretend there was no trade-off. Fifth, the nation as corporation model can work, if executed cleanly. Singapore is, in many ways, a company with a seat at the UN. Citizens are stakeholders. The government is management. GDP and living standards are the quarterly report. It feels cold. It feels transactional. But in terms of pure wealth creation, it's hard to argue with the scoreboard. Finally, small, focused, disciplined beats large, unfocused, chaotic. Singapore is tiny, but every square mile is treated like a scarce asset. Every policy is treated like a capital allocation decision. Most countries have more people, more land, more resources than Singapore ever did, but they lack what Singapore had: absolute clarity about what they were building, and 60 years of consistent follow-through. Singapore did not try to be everything. It picked a role in the global system, a hyper-efficient hub for trade, capital, and talent, and executed almost perfectly. That is not a miracle. That is strategy, taken seriously. Singapore shows us what happens when a place with no obvious advantages commits to a single strategy for decades. In the next video, we'll look at a different kind of asset: why billionaires buy art they rarely display. Not just for beauty, not just for culture, but for a financial strategy that quietly turns paintings into portable, discrete wealth. If you want to understand how strategic thinking builds power, for countries, for companies, and for individuals, subscribe. Because once you realize Singapore is simply extreme optimization at national scale, you start seeing the same logic everywhere. The game isn't who has the most resources. The game is who uses what they have with the most discipline. And in that game, tiny Singapore plays like a giant.